Watch out. Watch out.
Help! Help! They're trying to kill me!
Hey, stop him, I'll tase you. Stop him, I'll tase you.
Relo's trying to kill me!
On January 3rd, 2023, an LAPD motor officer was flagged down by citizens regarding a traffic collision in the area of Venice and Lincoln Boulevard. The motor officer observed Mr. Keenan Anderson running in the middle of the street and exhibiting erratic behavior. Officers ultimately ended up in an altercation with Mr. Anderson that ended with him being tased 5 times. Mr. Anderson was transported to a local hospital where he died 4 hours later. Keenan Anderson was a 31-year-old 10th grade high school English teacher at the Digital Pioneers Academy in Washington, D.C., and he was visiting his family in Los Angeles while on winter break from school. Today, we're going to be looking at LAPD's response and use of force against Mr. Anderson and comparing it to current case law and LAPD's current use of force policies to make our own determination if they were ultimately responsible for Mr. Anderson's death. My ultimate goal for this video is to give an unbiased opinion and state only the facts that are known to us at this time. For anyone who's interested, LAPD's use of force policy can be found right on their website, and it is made available to the public. I'll leave a link down in the description. On the day of the incident involving Mr. Anderson, the motor officer was flagged down and observed Mr. Anderson exhibiting erratic behavior. It was described as being consistent with that of him being under the influence of a narcotic. He ordered Mr. Anderson to sit down on the ground. Mr. Anderson initially complied, and he was being detained legally for a possible hit-and-run and DUI investigation. While Mr. Anderson was seated, multiple citizens involved in the traffic collision confirmed that he was the driver involved in the traffic collision.
So, give us a second. We're going to try to set everything up so that way no one gets hit and there's no other vehicles.
I think the guy up there needs help, though, because the guy's trying to run away. The guy who's driving this car...
Let's go get him.
Once additional officers arrived on scene, Mr. Anderson stood up and began pacing around the area, and he appeared to be looking for an avenue of escape. If you look closely, you can see his eyes are motioning back and forth almost as if he's looking for a direction to run. Mr. Anderson ultimately ends up fleeing into the street where he's apprehended by officers. While attempting to arrest Mr. Anderson, he struggles to get away and he's actively resisting. After a brief struggle, the officers are able to get Mr. Anderson's hands behind his back, and they deploy a taser in what I believe is an attempt to gain compliance and handcuff him while he's actively being tased. The officer ultimately ended up tasing Mr. Anderson 5 times. The Los Angeles Police Department's use of force policy does not specify how many times a suspect can be tased, only that it must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable LAPD officer. Obviously, I'm not a LAPD officer, I'm just a guy on the internet with an opinion, but I would say that everything leading up to the contact was handled professionally, and the motor officer was very polite to Mr. Anderson initially and attempted to de-escalate and gain compliance with him verbally.
Okay?
Please,
Just sit down for me a second here, okay?
please, look, sir.
Sit down for me. Sit down.
You're putting a thing on me.
Sit down.
Making
I'm
me
not
hot.
putting anything. Come here.
Please.
Sit down over here.
Please.
I don't want you in the road.
As far as the taser deployment goes, per LAPD's policy, it looks like the officers are required to give a warning when feasible, and the officer who did tase Mr. Anderson did give him a warning that he was going to be tased if he did not comply. I am also of the opinion, though, that the officers should not have used and relied as heavily on the taser as they did. It is my opinion that they should have been ready when the first initial 1 or 2 taser deployments went off. That's when they should have handcuffed him under power and got his hands behind his back as the taser is effective. They shouldn't have just used it as what looks like a pain compliance technique and just shock him over and over. And I believe they did ultimately end up using it about 5 times on him. Once Mr. Anderson was in custody and after he had been tased, the fire department and paramedics were called to the scene and they rendered aid to Mr. Anderson. He was ultimately transported to a local hospital in what looks like stable condition from the body camera video. 4 hours later at the hospital, Mr. Anderson had an unknown medical emergency and he unfortunately passed away. The cause of the death is still pending release by the LA County Coroner's Office. It's not known when they will be releasing that information to us, but once I do find out, I'll make sure to keep you guys updated. The Los Angeles Police Department did release Mr. Anderson's toxicology results, which showed he did have cocaine and marijuana in his system. If Mr. Anderson had died as a result of the drugs in his system, I don't believe it would have came 4 hours after the fact. But I also believe if Mr. Anderson was going to die as a result of the Taser deployment, that also would not have came 4 hours after the fact. If I were to speculate, I would guess Mr. Anderson possibly had some type of underlying medical condition which was exacerbated by his choice to put cocaine in his body, and then it was amplified even more when he was tased. I don't truly believe one side in this situation is completely at fault, but I believe there was a combination of factors that ultimately ended up in his death. My personal opinion is that LAPD did most everything pretty well in this situation. The officers kept pressure off Mr. Anderson's back and his neck area. After they had him cuffed, they rolled him onto his side and sat him up, which puts him in an easier position to breathe. I'm not a huge fan of the Taser in this situation, but I don't believe it constitutes excessive force. The officers' use of the Taser was also within their department's policy, and once Mr. Anderson was controlled, they stopped tasing him. I will say they probably should have transitioned to something else after the first 2 to 3 shocks weren't effective, but I also believe the Taser was not solely responsible for his death. I don't believe any of the officers' conduct could be constituted criminal, but I do believe LAPD will probably be found civilly liable at some point for Mr. Anderson's death at the conclusion of this entire investigation. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think this could change any laws regarding, officers' use of force and how they're going to use tasers? Let me know down in the comment section. If you guys liked the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and as we learn more about this situation, I will be sure to keep you guys updated. Thank you.